Welcome back to the D4 channel on another read along of the Star Wars The High Republic Convergence. Today will be a short read. I'm only going to read chapter 4 today, and it's not a very long chapter, but I have the other three chapters, on the D4 channel. But before we get to the reading, of course, like and subscribe to the D4 channel for our version of Star Wars news and entertainment on this side of the YouTube galaxy. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, hit the bell for notifications for every time we upload a video. Comment. We will answer all of your comments, no matter what side of the force they are. And we just started our own Spotify. It's D4 channel, is D4CH. You could check us out on Spotify. Right now we only have one episode, which was the remembering Carl Weathers and other news of the Star Wars galaxy. But we're definitely planning to upload more of our podcasts of either reviews of the shows or anything else we talk about, the news, anything else to talk about on Spotify. So please check us out on Spotify. I will have the link to our Spotify in the comments below. But without further ado, let us continue our book club of Convergence of the High Republic. And this is chapter 4, The Reyes Canal, Erasmus, capital city of Iram. When stars fell over Iram, no one looked up. The citizens of the capital knew there was nothing particularly interesting in hunks of rock from space, not when there were bellies to feed and dwindling rations being distributed. And so, as two objects pierced the mountainous clouds that perpetually clung to the planet's skies, there was no panic, no fear, no spare wishes or awe. Soon the city's defense missile towers would lock in on their targets, and in the event the missiles malfunctioned, the electrostatic domes that encased so many of Iram's major cities would shield the citizens beneath. Fan Tuzen was the first person to spot the ships entering Iram's atmosphere, but the boy who'd come from nothing had a habit of gazing toward the clouds. He had been distributing relief to the people in the Reyes Canal, a narrow waterway that emptied out into the Erasmus Sea. In this sector of the city, squat buildings leaned into each other like rows of rotten, crooked teeth. Drying seaweed and barnacles dotted the walls and waterline, breadcrumbs anyone could follow to the piers. Skinny saltwater birds that flew too close to the dome received a conk on the head and a shock. Though transparent, the protective shield around the city was visible across white electric bands, tracing the patterns of cresting waves, marking entry points for ships to come and go, and the steady hum of the shield was ever present. Fan Tu shouldn't have been in the Reyes Canal in the first place, but over the years he'd learned to shirk his security detail. He'd hopped on the back of an agape and guided the water horse to his favorite pier. Within moments he'd been swarmed by people, those born and raised in the Reyes and the refugees coming in droves from western islands, the latest to be attacked by Irano forces. Fan Tu should have felt fortunate that the war with Irano had yet to reach the capital, but the destruction of nearby towns meant the infrastructure of Erasmus was eroding as quickly as their coastlines during monsoon season, and it was those at the very bottom who felt that strain the most. Even as he handed out rations of food, hydration pellets, and anything else he could salvage from the palace's waste, he knew it was not enough. His cart had emptied and he'd only just started distributing. Pain wedged between his ribs as parents and elders walked away empty-handed. He'd gone as far as to offer the line-fiber tunic of his back, the gold-stitched slippers that made him feel positively ridiculous, but they never accepted. They never cursed him, never let their desperation turn into anger, not toward him. Fan Tu was, after all, one of them. He should have been on his way back to the palace. His mother's worried, but his muscle memory carried him to the pier. He made a mental note of how many people had left with nothing, more than he could count. The helplessness of it all was suffocating, and he sought solace from the sight of the sea. At the southernmost edge of the canal, a pale blue scorpion, the size of a pebble, crept along the cracked pier, too young to be poisonous yet, and small enough it must have slipped through the dome. He towed it off the ledge. Along the coast, tiny square houses crowded the shore, white stone washed in bright blue greens and yellows. Canvas awnings provided little shade at the height of the sun, but it was home. Once before the worst monsoon in his lifetime, he'd lived there with his biological mother and Tala, his little sister. Once, when the electrostatic dome hadn't been strong enough against the waves of a storm, they'd all been carried out to sea. Only Fantu had swum back. As the crowds dispersed, a girl with short brown curls and a dress stitched of some sort of recycled canvas tugged at his pant leg. She looked so much like his sister once had, and so he got down on his knee and pointed to her closed fist. "What have you got there?" he asked. She seemed to lose her nerve, but Fantu only smiled patiently. The little girl had his same coloring, tawny brown skin, pale green eyes, and a dusting of green freckles, the distinctive marking of Irami who had settled on the planet generations before. "For the queen," she peeped, unfurling her tiny fingers to reveal a cluster of mud-flecked pearls. "I know she will love them," Fantu said, pocketing the gift. As he stood, he caught the first flash of light in the sky and used the flat of his hand to shield his eyes from the sun. No one else looked up at first, used to the safety that the missiles and dome provided in the times of peace only used for storms. Fantu watched the pair of ships falling from orbit, too obscure to be recognizable. He searched the sky for others, but these two were anomalies. The defense should have been engaged by now, yet the vessel kept free-falling. He had the sinking realization that something must have gone terribly wrong with the escort mission of the Jedi transport. One of the incoming ships bore the telltale metallic blue of Iram's fleet. Its wings were on fire, and in the moment he blinked, it released its cockpit bubble. The transparent steel was snatched up in the breeze and rammed into the dome. A prismatic shimmer rippled from the hit and spread. Someone screamed as Irami's ship exploded on impact. He couldn't tell if the pilot had ejected or not. There was still the second starship obscured by the glare of the sun. Fantu reached for his comm, then cursed himself for having left it at the palace. The little girl tugged at his pant leg and asked, "Is that a shooting star?" "No, dear heart," he said, trying to keep his voice even so as not to scare her. He nudged her back up the pier. "Why don't you go inside?" As she took off in a sprint, the city's alarm wailed to life and every Irami in the streets finally looked up. They pointed fingers, clapped palms over their mouths. As it got closer, Fantu could make out the streaks across its hull like red wounds. An Irani starfighter. "All of you inside," Fantu shouted. "Now, please." To make matters worse, his security detail had spotted him and were running down the narrow canal street. "My lord, this is not the place for you. We must hurry back," said the leader. His distaste for the raised canal was evident in the sneer of his thin lips. "Not until everyone is safe inside," Fantu muttered, pushing past the guards to help an elder climb the steps into her home. "That is not your job, my lord," the guard said, exasperated. "You're right, Vigo, it's yours." Fantu sidestepped the tall man and picked up a toddler, nose dripping as his cries put the alarms to shame. He scanned the crowd searching for the mother, but there was still too many bodies clustering to get a view of the crash. People climbed onto the rooftops and clustered in doorways and windows. Terrible cries came from the refugee camps at the edge of the pier. "Why aren't the anti-missile cannons firing?" Fantu asked. "All we know is there's been some sort of accident and General Lau given order to stand down, but that was before." Fantu handed the baby over to a frantic young mother. She bowed low to him, and he ignored the feeling of discomfort at the deference. "My lord," Vigo tried again, clenching his gloved fist, "might I remind you that you are my charge. The city's defenses will hold." With his arms free, he whirled on his guard, pressing a finger on the man's decorated vest. "I have been there when the dome failed. Have you?" "No, my lord." Vigo's freckled nose wrinkled as he looked down to find his boots covered in mud. So far from the palace, and even with exploding ships in the sky, Fantu's armed guard cared more about his boots. "But there isn't anything you can do from here. Put Her Majesty at ease and come home." Fantu kept his feet squarely on the muddy ground, confusion and uncertainty thick in the air. He fixed his gaze on the remaining starfighter. Black smoke trailed from the wings. The canopy launched, along with a parachute, but the pilot must have been stuck in the cockpit. One of the wings sparked against the dome following the curve of the spare. The one of the dome's panels directly over the raised canal opened. A malfunction? An order? There was no way to tell. A prism of light refracted against the sun. Birds shot out into the clouds as the enemy ship came through the gap in the dome, barreling straight for the sea. "How unfortunate that we can't drown them all," Vigo said with an uncanny calm. Fantu imagined the horror of falling from such a great height, helpless and stuck, alone. No matter who was in there, he could never wish another being such a fate. Perhaps that's why he ran. My lord, the royal guard blustered, where are you going? But Fantu had already stripped off his sheer shawl and tunic, kicked off his ridiculous bejeweled slippers, and leapt off the pair. The tide was low, so he couldn't dive. He splashed through the sandy muck of the canal, broken shells digging into the soles of his feet. He thanked the great sea gods for the calluses he'd earned from a lifetime of running barefoot through the streets. Fantu was grateful for the life he had, the home he was given after the storm that changed everything. But in his heart, he was still a little boy from the poorest slum in the capital. The people of the raised canal helped one another. His mother had, and it had led to her demise. Even now, 15 years after her death, after the monsoon, he still heard her voice, still knew that in the worst moments, in the face of war and death and drought, she would say that there was always someone in need of help. If he could do it, he should. So it didn't matter that the plummeting ship was from the planet across a corridor of space. It didn't matter. If it was a life he could save, he had to. When he was far enough out, the ship breached the turquoise sea. A huge wave followed and Fantun dived. He could hear shouting from the distant shore, and then the pounding of his pulse as he kicked. His eyes burned against the salty brine, but his limbs welcomed the sensation of being enveloped by the warm sea. Like generations of Irami, Fantu could hold his breath for long periods of time. It was a trait that had come about from eras of diving for food. But even his strong lungs had a limit, and he swam for the wreck as hard and fast as he could. The water was hazy with disturbed silt, though farther out there was less pollution than at the shoreline. For the briefest moment he was 10 years old again, sinking to the bottom of the ocean after that terrible storm. He wasn't helpless now. He spotted the sinking vessel, dragging against Erasmus Sea. It hit the shelf of a cliff and teetered at the mouth of the trench. If it tipped over, he wouldn't be able to follow. Fantu cut through the water like a krill shark, with only the first signs of pressure on his lungs as he reacted to the open cockpit. Fantu was startled at the sight of her, red hair, dark as a copper, fear and distrust in her amber eyes as she struggled to get free of her harness. Streams of bubbles escaped her nose. She was losing too much air, and still she raised her arms as if to block his attack, as if it had come all this way to hurt her. He held up his palms and gave a slight shake of his head. Then she pointed to the floor, where she couldn't reach. There was a glint of metal, a blade. He seized it, yanked it free of its sheath, and cut through the safety straps of the harness. There was a terrible crunch of stone giving way. He felt the shift in the water as the cliff ledge began to crumble under the weight of the ship. As they sank, he grabbed hold of the second strap and sliced and tore through the fabric. There wasn't time for her distrust, the fear of him as he grabbed the front of her red uniform. She clung to him as her vessel tumbled into the dark pit of the trench. Pain laced her features, but she tugged on her arm, and they kicked up toward the beams of light refracting under the sea, his insides screaming for oxygen, jaw trembling as he gritted his teeth and fought not to open his mouth wide and inhale. The Iranian woman admirably kept pace with him, though when he looked back, he could see a trail of blood unspoiling like a ribbon. He couldn't tell which one of them was injured. He'd swum his entire life, but the final meters put his mettle to the test, thrashing and kicking until he could feel the light on the surface, the fire in his lungs, and then the humid kiss of air as they broke the surface and choked on the ragged intake of oxygen. The sea, which was never calm during the summer, stared them on rolling waves to the pier. They dragged themselves onto the muck of the canal and up rickety wooden steps. Fantu dropped the dagger and flopped onto his back, coughing the salt water he'd swallowed. "Are you all right?" He regretted the question the moment he voiced it, because when he sat up, she was looming over him, water dripping from her hair, a bruise blooming on her forehead, and her dagger resting under his throat. And that was the end of chapter 4. That is all I am reading today. Next time, we'll read chapter 5 and 6 of The Convergence. But again, thank you guys for joining me on this Star Wars book club read-along. Whatever you want to call it. Please, again, like and subscribe to the D4 channel. Bad Batch is out, so we will be doing Bad Batch reviews. I will be doing a review of Bad Batch Chapter 1 and 3 because my compadre was sick, so I will do that one by myself. But then for Episode 4 and moving forward of the Bad Batch, it should be the two of us as normal. But again, like and subscribe to D4 channel. Hit the bell for notifications for every time we upload a video. Please comment. We will respond to all of your comments. And check out our Spotify. There's not many episodes on it right now, only one so far, but there will be more of all the podcasts that we do that will be up on our Spotify. So please, support the D4 channel. Help us get monetized. And of course, to all you guys, all you Star Wars fans out there, may the Force be with you. Have a great day. Bye.